Boys is going to join us in the After the show and spill the beans on what it was like traveling around the world with the Beach Boys.
But you got to do it on Fox Nation only.
Right. So
exclusively.
Download it. FoxNation.com.
Have a great day.
Morning, everybody. To Fox's Alert Now. 2 hours from now, President Trump's national security team will go to Congress, and the stories there are significant. The entire Senate will be briefed on critical foreign policy issues that face the U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis will be there. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. One key player missing is the CIA Director, Gina Haspel, and some of these senators are not happy about that. It goes down at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, so we will have more on that inside of America's Newsroom. First, though, another big victory for President Trump and the GOP. Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith cementing her place as the 53rd Republican senator. That's where we start today. Good morning, everybody. Almost Wednesday, or it is already. I'm Bill Herron, live inside of America's Newsroom. Feels like it. How you doing?
Good morning, Bill.
Sandra.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandra Smith. Republicans now officially dominating control of the Senate. Hyde-Smith beating out Democrat Mike Espy by nearly 8% last night, making the Republican the first woman elected to Congress from the state of Mississippi. Here's what she told supporters last night.
I am so grateful. I'm so humbled for the honor that you have given me to elect me as your United States Senator. It is hard to describe the feelings tonight for me and my family, but tonight in this victory, the reason we won is because Mississippians know me and they know my heart, and thank you for stepping up, Mississippi.
So that victory now gives Republicans 53-47 edge in the upper chamber. And that's where we stand now.
Jonathan Serries live from Jackson with more this morning for us. Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning, Sandra and Bill. You know, Cindy Hyde-Smith is wasting no time getting right back to work. She's on an early flight back to Washington, D.C. The Republican defeated Democrat Mike Espy by a comfortable margin, although the race was still closer than some might have expected in this deeply red state. Hyde-Smith, who made some gaffes during the campaign that were deemed by some as racially insensitive, used her victory speech last night as a platform to bring Mississippians back together.
I want everybody to know, no matter who you voted for today, I'm going to always represent every Mississippian. I will work very hard, do my very best to make Mississippi very proud of your U.S. Senator.
President Trump, who campaigned heavily in this state for Hyde-Smith, tweeted his congratulations to her, saying, "We are all very proud of you." And Hyde-Smith's opponent added his congratulations as well.
She has my prayers as she goes to Washington to unite a very divided Mississippi. And she has my prayers and my willingness to help her to do that.
And Mike Espy says although yesterday's runoff did not produce the results he would have wanted, he says he's very proud of his campaign and predicted that it is the start of a new movement to bring his state forward. Sandra, back to you.
Jonathan Serries, thank you.
Meanwhile, the battle over securing the border has gotten hotter at this hour. President Trump now laying down the law, threatening to shut down the government unless he gets the money needed to build the wall. Senator Lindsey Graham warning Democrats do not take that warning lightly.
People throughout the world are watching the president. If he blinks here, his credibility on securing the border is dead. He's not going to blink. And to my Democratic friends, how do you expect the public to work with us to fix a broken immigration system if you support one wave after another? A lot's at stake here. The president's not going to bend. He's not going to back down. And I hope the Republicans in Congress will stand behind it.
Republican Ron Johnson, Chairman, Senate Homeland Security Committee. Sir, good morning to you and welcome back here. We got a lot to cover. Let's talk about the border first. What gives on that if some senators are at $5 billion and Democrats in the Senate say no more than $1.5 billion?
Good morning, Bill. Well, the president certainly deserves to have better barriers funded. $5 billion is probably the right figure at this point in time. But, you know, we have to recognize the fact that what we're seeing at the border right now is just a culmination of bad policy, loopholes, bad legal precedent that is incentivizing and rewarding people to come in this country illegally. You know, we talk about the 8,000 to 10,000 people in the caravan, but last fiscal year 2018, over 1,400 people per day either were apprehended coming to this country illegally between the borders or showed up at the ports of entry and didn't have proper documentation. Last month alone, that figure was 1,960 people per day. And so my concern is right now they're massing in Tijuana. My concern is they'll get organized. They'll start coming into the areas of the border where there aren't barriers, and it'll become an even bigger problem, and we'll start seeing larger and larger caravans.
Here is the quote, Washington Post from the president on that, sir. He said, we need Democratic votes to have a wall. Now, if we don't get it, will I get it done another way? I might get it done another way. There are other potential ways that I can do that. I guess you could do more manpower. Is that the fallback plan?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what the fallback plan would be, but Congress has to change these laws. You know, we incentivize people, we reward people for coming to this country illegally, and that's a huge draw. And as long as we make it so easy, once people get onto American soil, they begin this process of lengthened adjudication that can go on for years. You know, Bill, one thing that's not widely known that is in the last 10 years, we have administratively closed over 2.4 million immigration cases. In other words, we just closed the cases. We didn't decide them. These individuals are in legal limbo in the United States. They're not being deported. They really don't have any kind of legal status, but that's completely off of everybody's radar. So the numbers we're talking about are enormous. 1.3 million people, according to a study by a database in Syracuse University, have come into this country and opened up an immigration case from Central America alone. 1.3 million people since 2001. The numbers are overwhelming, so that when we're talking about an 8,000 to 10,000 person caravan, that is such just the tip of the iceberg of this enormous problem that is only growing larger.
Yeah, is the shutdown worth it, Senator?
Well, first of all, you really can't shut the government down. We've already funded about 70% of the appropriated accounts. If we don't pass a DHS appropriation bill, that will be deemed as essential for national security, so the spending will still keep going forward. But listen, there are certain things that would not be funded, but you know, it's very difficult to shut down the government.
Okay, sir, I want to move overseas, okay? And there's a big story that with Russia and Ukraine, and you're going to take action on this today. There's a statement that came out of Moscow a bit earlier today, Vladimir Putin blaming Ukraine for this standoff. Here's what he said. It's clearly provocation, a minor incident in the Black Sea, minor incident, and they impose martial law on the country. It's clearly done because of the upcoming election. It's an obvious fact. What are you willing to do today, sir, on your resolution, Senator, on this?
Well, we are going to be offering a bipartisan resolution to basically get tough on Russia. What I would love to see is multinational freedom of navigation operations going through the Kerch Strait into the Sea of Azov to make sure that we can establish that as the rule of law that Russia is going to have to abide by. But this is a situation where Vladimir Putin, he sees the results of the U.S. elections. He sees the weakened state of Macron and Merkel and of the British Prime Minister as well. And so he's testing the West. He's going to see how we react. So we must react with real strength and resolve.
Do you think taking a dozen soldiers captive is a minor incident?
No, not at all. This is a huge provocation. Ukraine obviously has the right of navigation through the Kerch Strait, and this is a provocation of Russia, of Putin. He is testing the West. We better measure up in that test.
Mike Pompeo will be there in 2 hours. Sir, will you attend that briefing? I assume you will.
Yes, we will.
Okay. He wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal today. Here's the headline on that. U.S.-Saudi partnership is vital. We don't condone Jamal Khashoggi's murder, but the kingdom is a powerful force for Middle East stability. What do you think about this today, Senator?
Well, what I certainly know is Iran is the most malign force in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia certainly counters that malign force. They are a valued ally in what we need to do to try and stabilize the Middle East. So we have to maintain as good relations as we can with Saudi Arabia, but the killing of Khashoggi certainly does not make that our capability of doing that any easier.
Now, this came up yesterday at the briefing. John Bolton was in the briefing room. He followed Larry Kudlow, and this topic came up about listening to that audio tape.
Oh, I haven't listened to it. And I guess I should ask you, why do you think I should? How many in this room speak Arabic?
You don't have access to an interpreter?
Well, you want me to listen to it? What am I going to learn from? I mean, if they were speaking Korean, I wouldn't learn any more from it either.
So you don't think it's important to hear that as a national security advisor?
I'm just trying to make the point that everybody who says, why don't you listen to the tape, unless you speak Arabic, what are you going to get from it?
What your feeling is on that, sir, but the CIA director will not be there. Would you like to hear from her?
Yeah, I definitely want to see exactly how the CIA came to the assessment that the Crown Prince definitely directed this. But regardless, whether it was the Crown Prince, it was certainly elements within the Saudi government that planned this and executed just a horrific assassination of a journalist. And that's something that should not be tolerated by civilized society.
And I would expect you to get a better explanation today. That would be one of your questions, correct?
Looking forward to it, right.
Senator, thank you for your time. Ron Johnson, the Republican of Wisconsin, thank you, sir.
Have a good day.
11 a.m. Eastern Time. Mike Pompeo's up there with James Mattis up on the Hill.
Civil war in Yemen obviously would be front and center, but anything that comes up on the killing of Jamal Khashoggi will obviously get a lot of attention. Meanwhile, some other big stories that we're watching for you this morning. The Taliban claiming responsibility for the single deadliest attack on U.S. forces in Afghanistan this year. We will have details on that next, plus this.
Holiday season layoffs from GM, brutal, all right? Very disappointing. Will it affect the overall economy? I don't think so.
President Trump and his team playing hardball with General Motors after it lays off thousands of workers, shutting down 5 factories. The possible effect on the rest of the economy. Maria Bartiromo will tell us where we stand on that coming up next.
Always love when she pays a visit. Plus, the drama continues in the Mueller investigation amid a blockbuster report about Paul Manafort. Former Attorney General Alberto Gonzales will join us later in the show.
The president has had Robert Mueller doing his job for the last 2 years, and he could have taken action at any point, and he hasn't. So we'll let that speak for itself. He has no intent to do anything.
Fox News alert. The Taliban now claiming responsibility for the single deadliest attack against U.S. forces in Afghanistan in over a year. 3 American troops killed and 3 others wounded in a roadside bombing about 100 miles southwest of Kabul. Reaction from the White House.
Anytime you have a loss of life, particularly by an American service member, it is a horrific tragedy. The president wants to make sure that the battle that we're fighting takes place there and not here.
Today's tragic news out of Afghanistan only drives home the need to support the men and women in our military and their families.
The Pentagon not releasing the names of the dead or wounded yet until their loved ones have been notified.
It's a great disappointment, obviously. The president indicated his own disappointment. There's disappointment that it seems like GM would rather build its electric cars in China rather than in the United States.
White House Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow in the briefing room reacting to GM's decision to close 5 North American factories and lay off about 14,000 workers. In a moment, we'll speak to Maria Bartiromo from the Fox Business Network. But in the meantime, Justin Trudeau had a conversation with the president yesterday on the phone because Canada is one of the places where you're going to have a factory shut down in addition to Michigan and Ohio, especially the northeastern corner of Ohio, which is pretty interesting part of the country when you think about how well the president did in 2016 there. Here's the tweet from Justin Trudeau. President real Donald Trump and I had a good call today to discuss GM, the auto industry, and how best to support people affected on both sides of the border. We're going to keep working to address continued trade barriers as we head into the G20 summit this week. Remember, the G20 summit gets underway at the end of this week in Argentina. It'll be one of the many, many topics that are talked about there among world leaders in Argentina.
And at the root of a lot of the frustration there, as the president said, nothing being closed in Mexico and China. The U.S. saved General Motors, and this is the thanks we get. You heard that frustration from the president, and obviously a lot of the reference back to 2008 when General Motors was the recipient of taxpayer subsidies.
I thought the Kudlow briefing yesterday was very interesting. It was very measured. It was very controlled. It's kind of the way that we've come to expect about Larry Kudlow. So back to Kudlow in the briefing room on what we do with the auto industry. Listen.
He believes, as frankly the Prime Minister of Canada, Trudeau, believes, that the USMCA deal was a great help to the automobile industry and to auto workers. And by the way, they made those statements separately. And yet, GM comes in right after the deal.
Very interesting comments. Maria Bartiromo, host of Mornings with Maria over in Fox Business, anchor of Sunday Morning Futures here on the Fox News Channel. How you doing?
Great to see you, Bill.
What's in the White House quiver, do you think, on this now?
Well, look, the president obviously likes loyalty, and he feels that corporations who have gotten a bailout from the U.S. government should be loyal to the U.S. government. Now, you can argue that point, but you know that the president is all about jobs and job creation. This is what he wants his legacy to be about. This is what he wants his presidency to be about. So he actually takes it personally when GM says it's closing down factories, it's closing down facilities and having to cut jobs, particularly after what we just came off of, the financial crisis where GM was on the brink. The entire auto industry was on the brink. Had it not been for a bailout from the U.S. government to revive these guys, after that huge bailout and the incentives that this company has gotten, the president feels that they should not be cutting jobs in America and moving those jobs to China. Having said that, it's very hard to argue because Mary Barra has her business. She's got to operate her business the way she sees fit, the CEO of GM, and she has to answer to shareholders. So while the president is upset, she's got to look at her business and best understand what works.
I thought the Wall Street Journal interview with the president, this is very interesting. He said GM's making a bad car, the Chevy Cruze. They can't sell it, so go to a different car. Right. Reopen a factory and get production going yet again. That's a critical part of northeastern Ohio, so watch that politically as well. Meanwhile, on China, we're going to get a lot of information this coming weekend.
Yes, we are.
When President Trump sits down with the Chinese leader.
Bill,
do you see this moving within days or weeks, or do you view this as a month-to-month standoff that could go sometime?
I think this can go for a long time, Bill. I do not see this ending anytime soon. Having said that, there is nothing priced into the market that we will see a deal. So anything could be upside potential. Any conversation, anything where people feel they move the ball forward will be a positive in terms of this relationship. But let's go back to the facts. China has been stealing intellectual property from the United States for decades. China has been forcing the transfer of technology from American businesses to Chinese businesses for a decade. And China has been unwilling to open its market to foreign companies like American businesses who want a piece of that $1.4 billion person population. China is unwilling to open its markets. Until we see actual fundamental change in China's behavior, I don't see President Trump making a move.
My sense from listening to Kudlow yesterday is that you're exactly right about that. Here's what I believe is the quote of the day, Washington Post interview. Here it is on screen. He was talking about the Fed and a number of other things. I have a gut, and my gut tells me more sometimes than anybody else's brain can ever tell me. I think that summarizes the way he manages everything in the West Wing.
He does. And by the way, his gut has worked for him, Bill. I mean, I know it's a quote that you laugh at, gut versus somebody's brain. But look at his gut in terms of going up against China. That was the right call. Look at his gut in terms of focusing on jobs and going to the industrial base of our economy during the election, like places like Ohio and Michigan, where Hillary Clinton did not. His gut was right. Now, his gut was also right, perhaps, on the Federal Reserve, because a lot of debate now on whether or not the Federal Reserve is moving too fast in terms of interest rate hikes. So I'm not going to go against this president's gut. Having said that, this is not ending anytime soon, because I don't know if tariffs are the answer to change China's behavior.
Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Bill.
You bet. Sandra, what's next?
New details emerging on what caused an Indonesian airplane to crash into the sea minutes after it took flight. We are learning what happened in those final moments. Just ahead.
In the world was Mark Zuckerberg, you ask, huh? That was the question at an international committee on fake news and disinformation in London yesterday. You see that, Sandra? That's an empty chair with a name tag. Yep. The Facebook CEO represented there by the name tag after he did not appear before lawmakers from 9 different countries. In his absence, officials interviewed Richard Allen, Facebook's vice president for policy solutions. The social network, is under investigation in Great Britain in connection with the Cambridge Analytica user data scandal. That's the selfie of the day, I think. I mean, look at that. That's like
it really was something, and lawmakers there really took the opportunity to really take advantage of that moment to hit on, you know, what frustrates them most about Facebook, about Mark Zuckerberg. I believe it was 9 countries that decided to tear into him in his absence there. But that was a statement indeed.
Company's got some issues. They're working through them. We'll see how well they do over time.
All right. Meanwhile, 2 big events happening in the next hour on Capitol Hill. We will be hearing from House Republicans at a press briefing. Their first since the holidays, of course. So that will be a big one to watch for. Meanwhile, House Democrats start voting on leadership roles in the next Congress, with Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi on track to return as House Speaker. Doug McKelway's live in Washington with more on this. A lot coming up in the next couple hours, Doug.
Absolutely, Sandra. The GOP outlook, in fact, is just about 2 weeks long in total. That is the duration of their majority, the brief period of time where they can attempt to wrap up investigations and pass what few pieces of legislation that seem within reach. Chief among them, of course, is border security and paying for the president's border wall.
We need to solve and have border security as we go through, and we know inside the House version we have resources for that, and we hope the Senate will do the same. And we've got the farm bill to finish out. We've got elements of the tax bill that you saw to come out with the extenders and others to finish as well. So there's work to be done, and we've got 2 more weeks to do it.
The House appears poised to pass that $5 billion border wall funding bill, but there are some devils in the details. 7 spending bills expire on December 7th. One of them is the Homeland Security bill, which contains border funding. The House may split off 6 bills not related to Homeland Security to try to get those funded and then deal with border funding after that. The big obstacle for full funding of the border wall is the Senate, where Democrats are looking at a much smaller amount of funding.
The $1.6 billion for border security negotiated by Democrats and Republicans is our position. We believe that is the right way to go. Third, if there's any shutdown, it's on President Trump's back.
That last comment from Schumer, a reference to President Trump's vow restated in a Politico interview published just this morning that he is willing to shut down the government if that wall is not fully funded.
All right. So, Doug, also coming up in a little bit, Democrats have an important vote.
They sure do. Democrats meet behind closed doors today at noon to vote on leadership positions. Virtually no doubt that Nancy Pelosi will regain her position as Speaker of the House. A bigger test, though, comes later in January, where the full House votes on the Speaker's job. But Pelosi's ultimate victory, even then, really not much in doubt. While there is a faction of Democrats opposed to her leadership, there's simply not enough of them to mount a serious challenge. Sandra, back to you.
Doug McKelway, thank you. Busy morning.
So that debate over securing the border is heating up in a significant way.
Regardless of how you feel about immigration policy, you should at least agree that we have laws and we're a nation of laws, and we ought to be able to keep our country safe and make sure that the people that are waiting in line to come into America the legal way are respected.
Steve Scalise there. The Trump administration defending its handling of the immigration matter as the president threatens to shut down the government over that issue. Mike Huckabee is going to address it. The governor is on deck coming up next.
All right, plus startling new numbers on illegal immigration. What we are now learning. We'll have more on this straight ahead.
Also, Sandra, we fell in love with Sister Jean during March Madness, and now she gets a very special gift from the students and the school that love her in return.
Come on and be my little good luck charm, you sweet delight.
9:32, check it out, folks. It's Christmas time in the city, just about up to 143 points of the open. I'll take that, right? You buy a lot of wrapping paper with that. The Fed chair is going to make some remarks a bit later today, so the market's watching for signs on that. And we, Sandra, found out last quarter we grew 3.5%. A little less than what the White House would like, but still pretty good number. 3.5% beats 2% for a long time.
You know, there's some optimism out there right now ahead of the president's trip, you know, whether or not there's going to be some sort of truce made with China. He's had some really tough rhetoric that's led to some uncertainty in the markets, and perhaps that optimism is leading to this gain that we're seeing a couple minutes into trading.
Well, I tell you, with this administration, they are fighting tooth and nail to get a better deal with China because they feel like we've been getting ripped off for generations. And they're determined to change it. We'll see how they do.
It's going to be a big week. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, yes.
Does the White House regret the fact that children were affected by tear gas and that this situation took place?
The White House would never want children to be in harm's way in any capacity whatsoever. However, that is why we are continuing to encourage people to follow the law and go to ports of entry. Law enforcement officials have used appropriate non-lethal force to protect themselves. Tear gas was used on average once a month during the Obama administration for very similar circumstances. In fact, they were actually for far less circumstances because they didn't have the same numbers in the mass rush that we're seeing in this caravan take place. Certainly no one wants women or children or any individuals to have this happen, which is why we've encouraged them to actually follow the law.
Well, that was White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders yesterday at her first briefing in almost a month, defending the administration's handling of the situation on our southern border. Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee is a Fox News contributor, also Sarah Sanders' father.
Yeah, I watched with great interest when I see these clips. You know, the big difference is not the way the immigration at the border is being handled. The big difference is the way the news media is covering it. And I'm not saying that just to throw a rock at the media, but they're not. Tear gas was used in 2013. There have been many times when there have been very strong pushbacks at the border. But this is the first time that we've heard anchors rip their clothes on national television and say, America has never done this before. Well, the truth is, it was a very civil way to make sure that someone didn't get truly hurt at the border. When you have thousands of people rushing the border, throwing rocks and concrete chips, these aren't trick-or-treaters. They're not looking for knocking on the door and getting a piece of candy. These are folks that are truly conducting an invasion.
Well, Sarah Sanders in that briefing went on to state a statistic that DHS has since backed up with statistics. 126 times tear gas has been used since 2010.
Yep.
She used this statistic and on average used once a month during the Obama administration for what she said was very similar circumstances, and in some cases less of a circumstance.
Did you ever hear any of the anchors or guests on the other networks during that period of time talk about how inhumane it was, how awful and horrible it was? I don't ever recall hearing it even as having happened.
Well, let's go back to the briefing room yesterday, because that was the first that the White House had 20 days after Acosta had temporarily lost his press pass there. Sarah Sanders took questions. She had a back and forth with Acosta. How did you think it went, by the way?
Oh, I think it went fine. You know, I personally think, and my advice to the president and to the press secretary would be, invite reporters from all over the country to come in and do these briefings. Why always these same cast of characters?
That's the way it's been done, though.
Exactly. And Donald Trump has done everything differently than it's ever been done before. This is a great opportunity to do the press room differently. Thousands of journalists across the country, most of whom would love the opportunity to sit in that room and ask questions. And I guarantee you they'd probably ask better, more thoughtful questions than some of the people who are preening for the cameras trying to make the story about what they said rather than the answer they got.
All right. Meanwhile, tensions are rising between Russia and Ukraine. A lot of demands on the president right now to get tough on Russia. Senator Ron Johnson was on this program earlier talking about Vladimir Putin testing the West. Listen.
So he's testing the West. He's going to see how we react, so we must react with real strength and resolve. This is a huge provocation. Ukraine obviously has the right of navigation through the Kerch Strait, and this is a provocation of Russia, of Putin.
The latest we've heard from the president, I don't like that aggression, he said in his most recent interview, and now he's threatening to not have this meeting with Vladimir Putin over it.
And I think he's dead serious about canceling the meeting, just like he was when he threatened to cancel the meeting with Kim Jong-un just before it was supposed to happen. And suddenly things started changing with the North Koreans in terms of their attitude. I think the threat of the cancellation may change at least some things with Putin and Russia. But the president does need to be tough with him. I totally agree with Senator Johnson. This is no time to act like that, well, we're going to just be nice to them. We've got to be tough with them. It's the only thing Putin understands is toughness. There's nothing else he respects.
Interesting. And now we're waiting on this Saudi briefing. Mike Pompeo, James Mattis will all be present there today. Civil war in Yemen up front. Obviously, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi could and probably will come up. Gina Haspel, her absence. What do you make of that?
Well, what's particularly disconcerting about her absence is it was the CIA who said that they had definitive proof that MSB was the one who was involved or knew about it, maybe even ordered it. So on one hand, I think that there is some responsibility if that is where that's information came from, and they're the source, then the head of the CIA probably should trot over there and explain that. And if they're not the source, they should deny it and say, we didn't say that. It's troubling. The biggest issue in the Middle East is that there are really no great, pure players that are there, and so it's a matter of lesser of evils. Do we have to be stern and tough about the dismembering of a journalist? Of course we do. But at the same time, you can't just completely cut all of ties with Saudi Arabia, because the imbalance of power tilts to the Iranians. And whatever we think of the Saudis, and I'm not a big fan of the Saudis, I'll be first to tell you, not nearly as much as the president is, but the Iranians, they're willing to kill women 20 years old in the streets and let the blood run down the sidewalk.
It was really fascinating to see that exchange in the press briefing room yesterday with Ambassador Bolton as well. Well, thank you, Governor Mike Huckabee. I didn't realize it was your first time in the fancy new dig, so it was nice to have you here this morning.
Ain't a bad place to do business.
Great to see
you. Good to see you, Sandra.
It is Studio J, as in Jazzy, Governor. Nice to see you. There's a new report now showing the number of illegal immigrants in the U.S. dropping to its lowest level now in more than a decade. William Lajeunesse is on that story live in L.A. today. William, what are we learning from this Pew Research study?
Well, Bill, several takeaways from this study and a few others. So the Pew Center says the number of illegal immigrants in the U.S. in the last decade fell from 12 million to just under 11. Now, that's based on census data in 2016. Economy still coming out of recession and doesn't fully reflect that surge of Central Americans. Also, it says that recent immigrants are just as likely to cross the border illegally as someone who overstays their visa, a tourist who never goes home. Mexicans, it says, today only make up about half the illegal population, Asians 22%, and 2/3 of the migrants have lived in the U.S. for 10 years or more. 43%, it says, have a U.S.-born child.
We have, for the first time, a majority of those coming to the U.S.-Mexico border are not Mexican, they're not single men, they're not just looking for work.
So that Pew study is nonpartisan, again, based on census data, but an equally nonpartisan study, you may recall, from Yale and MIT a few months ago, put the number of illegals in the U.S. at 16 to 22 million. Now, let's expand the picture, right? Not looking or illegal, but legal immigration as well. 2016, the highest single year of immigration in the U.S. in history, 1.75 million. Mexico, India, and China, the highest sending countries. So basically, Bill, the bottom line is immigration is a moving target. We can look at all this data, but it's very hard to get an accurate picture on everything when the data you're looking at is sometimes 2 years old.
Interesting
Bill?
stuff. Thank you, William Lajeunesse. Nice to see you there from LA today. Thank you, sir.
Well, she may be the most famous nun that you've ever seen, getting big recognition. Loyola Chicago presenting Sister Jean with an NCAA Final Four ring after the team's March Madness miracle run. Sister Jean, who's 99 years old, is a chaplain for the Loyola Ramblers and the team's most beloved fans. Well, that was a special moment, right?
Who deserves it more than Sister Jean? She stole our hearts. She drew so much attention to the tournament last year.
She did. You loved every minute of it.
Absolutely. So did you, right? It was great to see her.
It was neat.
Well done. #99. All right, Fox News alert. Roll it now. Tensions mounting in the Mueller matter. Paul Manafort, the center of several bombshell reports today. Former AG Alberto Gonzales reacts to that, coming up live in a moment right here. Plus this.
My emails have not been deleted, nor was there anything of substance, nothing confidential that was within them. So there's no connection between the two things.
Well, that's Ivanka Trump defending her use of private emails, what she said in a new interview this morning.
We can only speak to what our role is in that process, and not only has the president, but the entire administration has been fully cooperative with the special counsel's office, providing hours and hours of sit-downs, as well as over 4 million pages in documents. We continue to be cooperative, but we also know that there was no collusion, and we're ready for this to wrap up.
That was Sarah Sanders reacting to news that prosecutors claim Paul Manafort breached his plea agreement by lying to them. This is a New York Times report suggests that Manafort's lawyer, Kevin Downey has been briefing Trump attorneys, including Rudy Giuliani, on what Manafort has been telling Bob Mueller. It's an intriguing story. Alberto Gonzalez, former AG. Sir, how you doing? Good morning and welcome back to our program here. It's not illegal to share that information. What would be the great advantage for Giuliani and the president to have those briefings by Kevin Downey, who represents Paul Manafort?
Well, the advantage would manifest itself, it seems to me, on two levels. One, of course, is in response to the questions posed by the special counsel directly to the president. And having some information, whatever information or intelligence in terms of what the Mueller team is aware of, I think is helpful. It doesn't necessarily mean that, of course, the president should not be truthful in response to the questions being posed to him, but it may shade his answers. Some of his answers may not be so definitive, because if in fact there's knowledge about someone making a statement as to a certain set of facts, and the president may not be sure about those facts, he may qualify his answer to some degree. But as a general matter, I think the president is very worried about the investigation, and any kind of information his lawyers can get about the status of the investigation, whether or not it implicates the president or not, or implicates the president's family or not. I think it's something that would be helpful to the president.
I think it's a very intriguing answer, because right before Thanksgiving we were told the written answers were submitted, and they would know where Mueller was headed if they've had contact with Manafort's team. They would have a pretty good idea as to what direction he was going, right?
They would have a better idea. In terms of whether or not a good idea, I think there are still some missing pieces here, but they would certainly have a better idea. And as I said, I think it might have made a difference in terms of how they would fashion the president's answers to some of the questions posed by the special counsel.
What is your sense from there in Tennessee? That is Mueller close, or is this just the biggest guessing game in Washington now?
I have obviously no visibility into the Mueller investigation. It's an extremely complicated investigation, obviously involving multiple parties, with perhaps evidence in different countries, and so it's not surprising that it would take some time. This obviously has got to be done right. Bob Mueller understands that. Everyone's looking at this, and so he's going to make sure that everything's done properly. And to the extent they make any kind of allegations or charges or any kind of indictment, they're going to have very solid proof, and he understands that.
Okay, now Jerome Corsi, you know his name, right? Former advisor, affiliated with Roger Stone, who was a former advisor to the Trump team. He was with Tucker last night. He seems defiant as to whether or not he will agree to anything that Mueller's team asked him to say. Go ahead and listen to this.
And the special prosecutors blow you up. They do this, what I call perjury trap. It's completely rigged, and it's politically driven by Clinton operatives who have an agenda. If you can't give them what they're looking for to fill their narrative, they blow you up and charge you with a crime.
What do you make of that? The perjury trap and everything else he says.
I disagree with it. I mean, I have to disagree with it. Someone who once led the Department of Justice, and we're talking about DOJ investigators and prosecutors. If, in fact, that is what's going on here, I wholeheartedly condemn it, but they have a job to do to get information from any potential witness, and I think that's what they're trying to do here. But to intentionally set a perjury trap is something that I just disagree with. I think it's unfair, and I think it's unprofessional.
We've heard that from a lot of people involved in this.
Not
just Corsi is, the perjury trap. I mean, Giuliani talks about it all the time. The president's talked about it. His quote is, if you can't give them what they're looking for, they'll blow you off and charge you with a crime.
Of course, that's the president's lawyer talking. They're trying to establish a narrative
that was Corsi talking there.
Okay. All right. Well, again, I have confidence in Bob Mueller, and I have to have confidence in this investigation until proven otherwise. And I think if people are telling the truth, they're going to be fine. And that's the way I felt when I was the Attorney General, and that's the way I feel as a private citizen. And if in fact the objective here is to get people to lie, to perfectly set perjury traps, I do have a problem with that.
Sir, come on back soon, okay? Alberto Gonzalez, nice to have you here. Tell the truth. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Sandra.
Well, we will have much more on this for you with former Assistant U.S. Attorney Andrew McCarthy. He is our headliner today, so he will be joining us next hour. Plus, new findings on why an Indonesian airplane went down moments after takeoff. What we are learning about that crash now. We'll have that next.